I think to me is that it involves a lot of different things, because you get a lot of people coming from the server environment that think, oh, I can just jump right into it. And then they realize, oh, wait, there's a ton of networking here. And the flip side is also the truth. You get a bunch of people coming from the networking side and realize, wait a minute, there's a lot of server stuff I need to know here too. A lot of times you'll get people who know the networking really well and have never looked at anything on the storage side. So nothing to do with SAN. And there's a lot of parallels to be drawn there for sure. And you can build on that when you're doing a class, but they still lack that knowledge. So it's a lot of crossover.
Yeah, I would say that one thing that's good about data center compared to maybe some of the other technologies and networking especially is that it does overlap pretty significantly, like Dave said, with networking, for example, is a great starting point for a lot of route switch engineers. If I wanted to go learn, pick a technology, I might have to kind of start from scratch. But I know that I started as a route switch engineer. I transitioned into becoming a data center engineer, and the way I did that was I started with data center networking, learned what was different about data center networking, and from there, the good news is, especially on the Cisco side, networking is integrated into everything. So if I want to learn servers, well, it's, from a network engineer's perspective, I'm not going to be installing operating systems and to some extent hypervisors, although there's a lot of value to that, but just learning the network integration with Cisco server products like UCS, B series, and now X series, as we transition to that. But whether you're starting from the server side or the virtualization side or the storage side, or like me, if you're starting from the networking side, either way, there's a landing spot inside of data center. And so it's I feel like it can be a little bit less intimidating if you understand that there's a spot in the data center that you are going to be able to relate to, that you can land on, and then just sort of land and expand, right? Start with the networking, learn servers and learn storage, or if you're a storage admin, learn storage and storage networking, and then push into the networking space and kind of start to bridge those gaps.
That was fun.
Yeah, the one thing you don't want to hear, is, especially from a data center perspective, is everything just kind of go quiet. I definitely have my share of taking down networks. I don't think I've ever taken down a data center, although I was in a data center once and we were doing a demo and my colleague went to plug in our equipment onto the UPS, and they said, and it didn't come online. They said, oh, there's a switch next to it you have to flip. Well, he flipped the wrong switch. It took I take it back. It was half the data center went down. It got very quiet all of a sudden, and just everybody's hearts just dropped. And so we learned the importance, I say we, but we collectively learned the importance of power redundancy for a lot of those systems. But yeah, I mean, I've taken down networks by misconfiguration. I know early on when I was about CCNA level, I was on a core switch for a school system, and I meant to disable, I want to make sure I get it right. I was converting a layer 2 interface to a layer 3 interface. And the command for that in the Cisco world is no switch port. Well, I don't think I even had a CCNA now that I think about it, got onto the interface and said no IP routing. Well, Cisco and iOS, they are great at interpreting user intent. And even though I was on an interface,
took you back to global config.
It took me back to global configuration. Because they said, oh, Jeff, you didn't mean to put that on this interface. That's a global command here. We'll go ahead and do that anyways. Disabled IP routing. I panicked.
The whole platform.
Yeah, yes. on the core switch, 4500 Catalyst switch, and I re-enabled it, did some quick pings, nothing happened, so I just reloaded the switch in a panic and ran in to tell everyone that, hey, good news, the network is coming back online in about 45 seconds. So
I found the best thing to do is what Jeff did. You reboot the switch, you run back in, you say the network's coming back up, and you act like nothing happened. No, seriously. The best thing to do is you have to learn from what happened and document it so that other people know in the future, and even for your own future self, so you don't do the same thing again, or if the same thing happens again, you know how to fix it.
Yeah, I mean, big proponent of being forward and honest, and I tell everyone that in any kind of mentoring situation, control the things you can control, don't stress about the things you can't control. Obviously, if you're afraid for your job, then you're maybe going to act differently, right? But for the most part, I mean, Yeah, I don't don't exactly know where to go with that because that's a different story. But I will say that I once took down a network in a little bit more serious of a circumstance, and the way I did it was actually not my fault. I didn't even do the wrong thing. Spanning tree didn't work. We had a device, a core device that was running traditional spanning tree, and an access closet switch that was running rapid spanning tree. And that rapid spanning tree device had a single uplink to one of the core switches. And so my job was to go on site and plug in the other link and allow spanning tree to block it, but at least we'd have redundancy. Well, plugging in that other link, even though it should have worked, did not block the link, caused a massive broadcast storm on the network, took down the network, and I immediately unplugged it to bring the network back online and went and reported it. Because what else are you going to do? I mean, I could try to hide it, and Dave
Right.
jokingly said,
Right.
and it was a joke. You can always try to play it off, but
There's
I
no
was
point in that.
yeah, I was
It's
very
a joke.
yeah, exactly. No, I mean we can have some fun with it, but ultimately it's your best bet is to just be upfront and honest and direct because we are all learning and we're all works in progress. And so in that situation, the biggest takeaway for me was not, I could also take the approach that I did nothing wrong. Well, I also did that in the middle of the day. And so that was a big lesson to me early in my career. It said, okay, I know this is low risk. In theory, spanning tree is supposed to work. Even in that mismatch situation, spanning tree is supposed to work. When I identify something that seems a little off, okay, maybe that should be an after hours. If I'd done it after hours, then everything would have been same thing would have happened, but nobody would have been impacted, and I would have learned the lesson in a less hard way. So always look for the lesson I think that you can take. That would be one of my pieces of advice. Don't be so quick to say I did nothing wrong, because as soon as you get defensive, as soon as you are unteachable, then you're just going to have a similar situation come up again. If you can learn from your mistakes, I love what you said, write documentation, not just for you, but for your future staff and for your future colleagues.
Well, we had a specific issue at one of my customers where specifically on the data center products, we had some of the original Catalyst 5000, the Nexus 5000s.
Oh, yeah. Huh.
And they were upgrading to the Nexus 5500. Should be no problem, right? We're linking them together, starting to migrate things over. Once again, spanning tree compatibility problem. They were even running the right versions. It was literally a code issue. And I mean, ultimately, we reported to Cisco an open attack case, and Cisco has to fix it because it's a coding issue. But believe me, that got documented. We had big notes on the things. Don't plug this into this. We had notes in the data center saying, don't plug these things together because, it crashes the whole network. And that's what happened originally. Now, fortunately, in our case, it was after hours because we were migrating servers. So at least it wasn't during production. But it still took everything down. And again, we didn't do anything wrong. It was just these things happen. Sometimes it's not under your control. That same place I was working, we were doing a migration, and this is several years back, but they also had some Catalyst 6500s. And all we were trying to do was upgrade the supervisor engine. So we had it all planned out, maintenance window, we had all of our configs backed up. And in fairness, again, we should have researched it a little more than we did. But, the time comes, we swap out the supervisor engine, power the switch back on, we get a bunch of red lights on everything. Short version of the story is they changed where those supervisor engines had to go in the chassis. Originally, they could be in slots 1 and 2, and on the laters, when they went to the Sup 720s, you had to put the supervisor engines in the middle. Doesn't sound like a big deal, but we had to rewrite our whole configs. So we had to switch it all back, wait another week, rewrite our configs. You'd think that was the end of the story, but no, the next week, we did the same thing, maintenance window again, put the supervisor engines in the middle, moved the line cards up, powered it all on, red lights on everything because we needed the bigger power supplies too. And then you think it's done, right? No, the next week, we get the bigger power supplies, everything boots up, red lights again, needed the higher speed fan tray. So should more research have been done before we did all that? Probably. Now, I'd be happy to say I wasn't lead on that project, but I was still involved. I should have researched it myself. So, yeah, I mean, mistakes happen. And at the end of the day, all you can do is learn from them, document them, move on. Yeah.
I think that one of the best things you can do if you're looking to get into any particular technology is take advantage of the opportunities that you have wherever you are. And that's a big piece of advice I try to give to engineers. I hear a lot of times that, I want to do this, but I am in a job where I don't get to do this technology that I want to do. Okay, that's fine. Study that outside of work, but while you're at that job, make the most of it. So if you're on a knock and you want to be a data center engineer, well, make sure while you're on the knock that you're doing everything you can as far as documentation, best practices, but also just taking advantage of whatever it is you're responsible for, learning it in detail. But you can go above and beyond that, and you can ask your senior engineers questions. And some engineers prefer it more than others. I loved it when a young engineer came up to me and wanted to know what I was doing, those kinds of things. When I first started in this industry, that's how I kind of migrated into a larger role. Was I was responsible for just hanging access points and just screwing in switches. And so as an engineer would give me a config to paste in, I would go back to the engineer and say, what is this line doing? What are these things doing? Like, why are we configuring it like that? And those kinds of things are going to allow you to take advantage of, you might say, I don't get to touch data center equipment, but does your company have a data center? Do you have engineers who touch the data center equipment who are responsible for that? Ask questions, get involved how you can, even if it's, and look for ways to volunteer. I mean, if I need somebody to go to the data center and just screw in some switches, it doesn't sound glorious, but just putting your hands on the switches and putting them in the rack, that's a great start. And volunteer for that and have that go-getter attitude.
Yeah, I was going to say the exact same thing. Part of how I even got started in IT to begin with, the company that I started with, my first, you could say, tech job, I was actually hired to run their phone system, their PBX, which I didn't really know anything about. I had to learn that too. They just didn't have anybody else who knew it, so they figured they'd give me a try. But I got into the IT side and working on the computer and the server and the network side just because I volunteered to help. The team that was there was either busy or didn't know how to do something. I'm like, I'll look it up. I'll figure out how to do it. And they're like, go ahead. If you can figure it out, you can do it. So, your volunteering is a great way to do it. A lot of people will want the help or just be willing to show you things. And the other thing I was going to add is particularly on the Cisco side of data center. Cisco actually provides a lot of tools you can get either free or relatively inexpensively to practice all this. So you have Cisco CML, which is the Cisco Modeling Labs, which can model like the Nexus 9K. You have the ACI simulator that you can get. Now, you need a decent server to run it on, as we've discovered sort of recently. So you do have to have some resources to be able to run it, but it can do a lot of things and get you, if nothing else, familiar with the interface and how the different components fit together. And you can do that almost free just to get started, to get a start or, first look at something.
UCS Platform Emulator is also available. That's a free download to emulate an entire UCS B series and C series environment. And I will say that's one of the biggest challenges I think that people face with data center, like getting into and learning it, is lab equipment. Data center equipment is notoriously expensive.
Yeah. And hard to run.
Yes, because you need power, cooling.
Yeah.
If you have the power and cooling, a lot of data, the good news with that is most data center equipment, even the UCS B series, will run on 110 volts inside of your home if that's all you have available. So you can't run 8 servers on a chassis, but you can actually plug it in if you have the right power cable.
And big enough circuit breakers.
That's a factor. As long as there's no real loads running on it, you can keep that power consumption down. And the good news is data center, especially Cisco data center technology, has been around for 15 years at this point. There's a lot of used equipment out there that comes in at a surprisingly low cost. Yeah. So these days you can do a lot. You can do a lot by just getting some old equipment, plugging it in. Maybe you can plug it in at work. Maybe you have to do it at home. But look for those opportunities and don't hesitate to ask questions. I mean, I've had a lot of employers allow me to just, hey, grab some extra rack space, throw some lab equipment in there. If that's an option, great. But configuring it yourself is going to be very important. And even though it can be a challenge with data center, it is doable. So especially the free resources that Dave talked about.
Yeah, and that's a fact about asking about space, because when I was studying for my CCIE route switch, the enterprise I was working for at the time, I had no way to run the equipment at home, and that was before we had emulators for everything. So yes, I'm buying a lot of used equipment, but I really didn't have any good place to put it. And I just asked them, I'm like, can I put this back in the data center? They're like, as long as you don't plug it into our stuff at all. I'm like, nope. All I need is access to a terminal server. And then, yeah, they let me run it. So effectively, they paid the power bill for all of it. So, yeah, some worst anybody can say is no, right? If you ask them for something.
Yeah, exactly. It's worth a shot.
I mean, the thing I love the most is VXLAN, but that's not new and exciting, and people have heard of it. So
why do you like VXLAN so much?
It changes the whole layer 2 landscape. We had to have things like OTV, and there have been so many, even Fabric Path back in the earlier days and stuff.
Fabric Path, that's good.
Yeah. And we've been able to replace all of those. And I like it also coming from a service provider / route switch background, because it's very closely related to MPLS. So for me, I looked at it and went, oh, so you're doing MPLS at layer 2 effectively. So you're sending MAC addresses instead of IP addresses. Okay. So
yeah,
that's why I like it. But
yeah,
but that's not new. But
Yeah. The only thing that comes to mind, and it has been a couple of years, I mentioned earlier the Cisco X series servers. Those are kind of cool. They're looking at essentially expanding out the PCIe buses to, you're talking about not just sharing, networking among all of these servers, but now you can possibly share GPU, you can share hard drive space, you can share memory, and their vision for it hasn't been fully realized, but at this point, the B series and UCS Manager, I mean, they're on their way out the door, and it's all going to be managed through Intersight, and it's going to be X series, and so, it's just seeing the evolution. There's always an evolution of hardware over the course of time, but
the B series has held on for a long time now.
Yeah, it's a special one, and it's how, when I first got into data center, the B series was just the bedrock for a Cisco data center configuration, and it's had a very long and successful career. So it's a little bittersweet to watch it be retired.
Yeah,
but
they definitely got their use out of that chassis. Sort of like the old Catalyst 6500. It was around for a long time.
When that chassis came out, they said, we designed this thing to last until 2020.
They made it.
2020. Yeah, this is 2009, and they've not only made it, it's gone well beyond 2020. And so, it is funny to see that, it actually worked. Because sometimes it's, we'll see if it's still running in 11 years.
Right.
Yeah, still active and running. So, Cisco data center technology, it's a lot of fun. It's really neat. They have great end-to-end solutions because they touch the compute and the storage networking. They've had various storage products over the years, but they aren't really a storage company. But you can create a lot of the data center using Cisco technology, and that makes it so that if you are focused on Cisco, that you can get a lot of experience throughout the data center. It used to be that our responsibility in the data center was to configure the networking, and then we were done. But the fact that you can get in there and do servers and do virtualized networking and you ACI and VXLAN, like you talked about, to now do inter-data center networking, and it's fun. It's complex at times, but I tell you what, bringing it all together, it's nothing quite like it. Bringing the solution together and having a full-fledged data center stack.
And the other nice thing, too, for people just getting into it, if you're coming in brand new to data center with no experience, because we talked a bit, coming from a networking background or a server background, if you come in with no background, the other cool thing related to what you just said is you're learning particularly NXOS, but that has a lot in common with iOS XE, not so much iOS XR, but iOS XE, which a lot of companies are using in the enterprise. So that's also getting you a foothold into the route switch side of things as well. Not to mention the fact that may not be Cisco's intended use, but I know a lot of enterprises that are rolling the Nexus out as their LAN switches. even though they're intended to be data center switches. It's not like Cisco is going to come in and say, no, you're going to have to give us that switch back. That's not how you're supposed to use it. So a lot of companies, I think some of them may have thought at first that the Nexus was supposed to replace the Catalyst line.
Yeah.
And that's what they did. Again, not the intention, but nonetheless, either way, you're still getting experience as somebody who's new starting in data center. You're still going to get experience that's going to help you move in, particularly into the route switch side.
Yeah.
On the Cisco product line. So.
Absolutely.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to click here to subscribe to CBT Nuggets and click the notification bell to make sure that you're aware of every time we post new content. If you're interested in a career in IT or you want to brush up on your IT skills, then swing over to our website, and while you're there, be sure to sign up for a free trial.